Well, first of all, let me thank Prime Minister Yatsenyuk for once again pulling together a very intellectually stimulating gathering. I am very proud to be a member of your board, of the Kyiv Security Forum board, and I also want to begin by saluting not just the Ukrainian military, although I do that and have the greatest of admiration for them, but also to salute the Ukrainian people. We know very well what they have endured this winter, a particularly cold winter. I should note, in fact, that at midnight 2 nights ago, I was out with a drone interceptor unit. They were conducting training. And the bone-chilling cold is something I haven't experienced in many, many years. I think probably since I was going through ranger school in the dead of winter on a mountain in North Georgia. What the Ukrainian people have done, the determination, the fortitude, the creativity really is hugely impressive. We're just ending my 9th trip to Ukraine since 2022, and I should note that I was first in Ukraine when it was still a member of the Soviet Union. It was a historic visit by the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, who was making the first visit to the Soviet Union since General George C. Marshall went to Yalta, and it was quite a historic occasion. And to see what has happened in Ukraine since that time is truly remarkable, and again, another source of enormous admiration. This was a really great trip because we got to meet with General Syrskyi. We separately met with his deputy. We went out, as I said, for drone training in the middle of the night. We went to the Air Defense Operations Center, which has just been established. We were there on the first day that it's set up, and it is hugely, hugely impressive. Deputy head of the President's Office, the DTEC CEO, and learned about the extraordinary challenges, of course, in detail, of the damage to the electrical grid, what they are doing to get it back online, the issues that many people are going to have to deal with for quite some time, given the enormous destruction that has been wrought. 2 different drone units, and each time we are here, we visit with the same unit, Nemesis, and to watch its evolution has been extraordinary as well. The first time I visited, they were a battalion, then they became a regiment. They are now a brigade and growing steadily. They operate on ground, in the air, and at sea. We also met with leaders of the 3rd Corps, the Snake Island Institute, other drone facilities, and so forth. And to watch every few months what has taken place is really a joy for an old soldier to see the creativity, the initiative, the independent action, and the rest of it. How do I see the situation? I see it the way the Wall Street Journal does in an editorial that they published earlier in this week, that Putin is not winning. I really strongly believe that that is the case. And let me just supplement a little bit of what the deep state had to say, and I agree wholeheartedly with their assessment. At sea, how does a country that has no navy sink nearly 40% of the Black Sea Fleet and then force the Black Sea Fleet to tie up all its ships at a port in southeast Black Sea as far from Ukraine as they can get? And oh, by the way, Ukrainian drones even got into that port and heavily damaged a submarine. How did they do it? Again, incredible Ukrainian innovativeness, some intelligence help, I suspect, to identify where the ships were, aerial drones that pinpoint their location, and maritime drones that sink them. And you'll recall that it started quite auspiciously or inauspiciously for the Russians with the sinking of their very flagship, the Moskva, the pride of the Russian fleet. So at sea, you've seen extraordinary achievements. In Russia itself, Ukraine is very much taking the fight to Russia, focusing very heavily on critical military infrastructure in particular refineries, storage facilities for fuel, and so forth. And I am keenly looking forward to seeing the Flamingo. This is the cruise missile that it has a greater range than the U.S. cruise missile that was under discussion, quite a bit greater. It's 3,000 kilometers as published, and has a larger warhead. And again, another example of Ukrainian industrial might and design and so forth. And that is going to cause enormous damage as the production of it scales up. And we met with the individuals that actually do that particular production. The same as the shorter range one, which is also coming into big production. We mentioned about the ceasefire talks. I think that was entirely predictable. I think, by the way, that Ukraine has demonstrated extraordinary skill and willingness to make some compromises while still establishing some red lines because of your constitution and so forth when it comes to if there was going to be land swapped for some other objective. What has happened here, I hope, is that the United States will finally recognize that Vladimir Putin has no intention of negotiating a true ceasefire, allowing the kind of security guarantees that are so essential. And I salute here our European friends who have played such a key role in designing the security measures, the guarantees for Ukraine, even bringing the United States into it in terms of monitoring a cessation of hostilities and confirming violations if that is the case. I would hope that, again, when Medvedev, when Putin, when the others state that they still insist on their core demands, which are outrageous, of course, essentially demilitarizing Ukraine, being given the land, the fortified cities that they aren't even going to be able to get to for quite some time, much less actually conquer. And I'm sure they'd love to see President Zelensky replaced by a pro-Russian figure. None of those can be acceptable to Ukraine, and I know that they are not. So what could happen here? How could this, I somewhat famously forgot that I had an embedded reporter with me when we were doing the fight to Baghdad when I was a young division commander of the 101st Airborne Division. And I was watching the various assumptions that we'd been given invalidated one by one. And I finally turned to my reporter and I said, tell me how this ends. And I can actually, and by the way, I heard that question at every single congressional hearing until finally, after the surge in Iraq, we showed how it could end. In this case, I think there actually is a unique opportunity right now. Russia is much more fragile economically, society, I think, as well. You're watching the sentiment turn against it. I also met with your Foreign Intelligence Service chief, who's terrific, and we meet with him, and Gore every time we're here as well. Their National Welfare Fund is going to run out of money this year. India is going to buy much less gas and oil. They're beginning to taper it down already, part of the agreement on tariffs with the United States. The EU has set a price, so they're getting much less revenue. They're sustaining enormous damage to their energy facilities in particular. They're running out of money. Interest rates are exceedingly high. There's going to be no investment based on loans in that country. Inflation is running very, very high, and I think they're in a very difficult position. And if, in the wake of the negotiations, we realize that Putin is not serious about it, it's time for the United States to approve the sanctions package that Senator Lindsey Graham has 90 co-sponsors out of 100 senators. You should know that the United States Congress and the U.S. people are strongly, strongly behind Ukraine. And even as you see some of the actions taken by the executive branch, in particular, of course, getting Europeans to meet the security requirements for their own continent to a much greater degree. And you do have to, I think, give President Trump considerable credit. You obviously have to give President Putin considerable credit since he's the greatest gift to NATO since the end of the Cold War, tragically. But if the sanctions are done now, the EU is already looking at a 20th round of sanctions. The EU, very impressively, after lots of wrangling, approved a 90 billion euro support package for Ukraine, which is a game changer. That'll solve Ukraine's economic and fiscal challenges for at least a year and a half and probably allow the production of drones to double and lots of good effects out of that. And then start to convince Putin that, you know what, he can't outsuffer the Ukrainians, the Europeans, and the Americans, and that he is going to need a cessation of hostilities. Certainly we should do more to help Ukraine in particular when it comes to anti-air and ballistic missile defense. That is a shortcoming that is very difficult to overcome, but Ukraine is overcoming just about everything else. Again, as I said, Ukraine this year probably will produce 7 million drones. They change the software on a near weekly basis, and they change the hardware every few weeks. There's never been a procurement system like this. Now this process in Ukraine is producing tomorrow's technology for today's war. In contrast to the system that we're saddled with in the United States, yes, it does F-35s and aircraft carriers, but it often is such a long process that you end up with yesterday's technology for tomorrow's wars, and we need to be learning from Ukraine in that regard. So I actually do think there is a unique opportunity right now, given the greater fragility of the Russian economy, the greater support by the EU and the European NATO members, and certainly, and by the way, in Congress, in the National Defense Authorization Act, there is funding for Ukraine for each of the next 2 years. There are also restrictions on any drawdown of U.S. forces in Europe and also, by the way, in Korea. So I don't think that this is any kind of fantastical vision here. I think this is actually reasonable if we all take the additional actions to help Ukraine stop the Russians cold on the front lines and also help Ukraine do better against missiles and drone swarms, and then do more to really hurt the Russian war economy, including, by the way, in the sanctions package, are secondary sanctions on countries that provide the components to Russia, and of course that is China, providing enormous quantities of chips, of brushless motors, of, again, all of the different components that are necessary for the military-industrial complex. So again, I am very much with the Wall Street Journal that Putin is not winning.